The PlayStation 3 was no doubt a legendary console, and despite a slow start, the console would go on to sell over 87 million units worldwide with a massive library of games, many of which are still exclusive to the platform or PlayStation family of consoles. Today, many PC gamers are able to enjoy the vast library of PlayStation 3 games thanks to the fantastic progress of the RPCS3 emulator, and we are finally making a return to this topic with the newly released ASUS ROG Ally, and with it we can take another look at PlayStation 3 emulation and test the capabilities of the Ally, which will potentially provide a significant improvement to the RPCS3 experience equipped with its AMD Z1 Extreme processor with support for the AVX512 instruction set. So please join me, Rob, the Retro Tech Dad, as we go through this journey exploring PlayStation 3 emulation on the ROG Ally with this massive and comprehensive showcase. This was an absolute doozy of a video to put together, and it's been something I've been working on since I received my ROG Ally a few weeks ago. I do hope that this video will be helpful to those with an Ally and serve as a useful resource for PlayStation 3 emulation on the handheld. Hopefully this will inspire some to check out games they haven't thought about in a while or even heard of. Likewise, I hope this inspires those with other devices that can run RPCS3 to check out some of these, and maybe some of those settings will help out as well. So first things first, let's go through the setup process of RPCS3 and cover some of the key settings that you will want to familiarize yourself with when making adjustments to some of the games featured in this video. Head on over to the official RPCS3 website, which will be linked in the description, and download the latest Windows version. Once downloaded, I recommend extracting to a location that is easily accessible. You will need something like 7-zip to be able to extract the contents of the file. Now before we open RPCS3, head on over to Darth Sterney's firmware page and grab the latest PlayStation 3 firmware. As always, links will be in the description. The latest firmware is version 4.90. Click on download and then save the PS3 update.pup file to an easily accessible location. We will be using this file shortly. So heading back to the RPCS3 folder that you extracted, there will be the rpcs3.exe file, which you will open to start the emulator. You will be greeted with the first time setup screen of RPCS3. I personally like having a desktop shortcut, but select the options that work best for you. I recommend clicking on the Do Not Show Again option, and then check off I have read the quick start guide and click continue to proceed. Okay, now we're on the main screen for RPCS3. First things first, click on File, then click on Install Firmware and navigate to the location that you saved your PS3 firmware file, ps3 update.pup, and click Open. You will get a prompt that says installing firmware, and then another one quickly after that saying it was successfully installed. I recommend checking off the Don't Show Again option. Click OK, and you will get another screen that comes up which shows the compiling PPU modules. Once done, we can now go over a few brief options in RPCS3. First, let's establish our default settings, which will be used for more than half of the games in this video. On the top of RPCS3, there are a few options, and the one we will use right now is the configuration dropdown. Click on the CPU option in the drop-down menu and a new screen will appear. The only change that needs to be made to our default setting is to head on over to the GPU tab and then switch the renderer from OpenGL to Vulkan. Now before we close this window, we are actually missing a tab on the top that we will need for a handful of games, which is the Debug option. So let's quickly hit apply and then save, and the screen will close. Close RPCS3 as well. Now open your RPCS3 folder and then head into the GUI configs folder and open the current settings.ini with Notepad so that we can make an edit to this file. Scroll down and find the meta category and then change the show debug tab equals from false to true. Click on file and then save and close this window. Okay, so let's launch RPCS3 again and now check your configuration dropdown. Select one of the options to bring up the settings, and now you should have the debug tab at the end. So let's briefly discuss how to add games. In order to install PSN packages and RAP licenses, you will go to the File option, Install Packages, RAPs, and EDATs, which is used to install PSN PKG files. You will need to first add the PKG file, which will then install it to RPCS3. Once a game has been installed, you then need to go back and install the RAP license file. Now, to add your disk-based games to RPCS3, you will go to the Add Games option under File. So while we are here, we might as well add a disk-based game so that we can go over custom configurations and game patches. From Add Games, navigate to where you have extracted your disk-based images. You will need to extract the contents of an ISO image in order to add them to RPCS3. In this case, I'm going to add God of War 3, and you will see that I have a PS3_game folder. All PS3 games that have been extracted from ISO will have this folder. Select the PS3_game folder, and then it will be added to RPCS3. As you can see, the game is now listed in RPCS3. So let's go over custom configuration options. For about 20 of the games in this video, we will need to set per game options to get the best performance and compatibility out of them. We will use God of War 3 as an example of how to do this and just quickly go over some of the more common changes that are made. Throughout the gameplay showcase, I will detail any changes that were made as well as list these settings on screen. Okay, let's right click on God of War 3 and then choose Create Custom Configuration. You will now get a new window that allows you to change settings only for God of War 3 using the default settings we established earlier as a template. At the top, we have several tabs, and for the most part, we will be making changes under CPU, GPU, Advanced, and Debug. For CPU, some of the more common areas to change will be the Enable SPU Loop Detection and changing the SPU block size. For GPU, some common changes will be under the Z-Call accuracy, as well as making changes to the additional settings section on the right. The Advanced tab will commonly see changes to the RSX FIFO accuracy, which is on the right side, but again, I will mention what needs to be changed as necessary. Finally, a quick look at the Debug tab, which will have a few more options that might need to be checked off. Of course, before closing the window, make sure to hit Apply and then select Save Custom Configuration and the window will close. To make sure you are launching a game with your custom configuration, I recommend right-clicking on the game and selecting Boot with Custom Configuration. Now, a few games might require some game patches to be set. For example, God of War 3 has a number of game patches. In order to access the game patch screen, simply right-click on the game and then choose Manage Game Patches. You will get a prompt from RPCS3 that new patches are available. Select Yes to update. Now, you should have different patches that are available which correspond to the specific version of the game you are using. A lot of these can be very useful when trying to maximize performance and disables graphical features which don't impact gameplay. When making any changes, make sure to hit Apply and then Save. Now, if you are interested in having Sixaxis support for the games that make use of the feature, you will need to download Handheld Companion, which will allow us to make use of the Ally's built-in gyro sensor. So let's head on over to the Handheld Companion GitHub page and grab the latest release, which will have support for the ROG Ally. As always, I will have this linked directly in the description. Once downloaded and installed, open Handheld Companion, and here we can take a look at a few settings. So for the purposes of this video, we are strictly looking to enable the gyro feature. This is very simple to do, and you will want to go into the controller section. Then from the drop-down menu, choose Emulated DualShock 4 Controller. On the bottom left corner, make sure that the service is started, and then hit Minimize. Now go back to RPCS3 and select the Pads option at the top of the screen. The Gamepad settings window should come up. Under Handlers, you will want to make sure that it is set to DualShock 4. And then under Devices, select DS4 Pad number 1, and now the Configure option under Motion Controls should be active. You can click on this to confirm that the gyro controls are responding correctly. Once configured, make sure to hit Save. Now, if you don't want to use any gyro controls, just simply quit Handheld Companion and switch the handler back to X input, and make sure the X input pad number 1 is listed, and then hit Save. So I wanted to outline some expectations with PS3 emulation. RPCS3 is in an active development and goes through updates on a nearly nightly basis. As such, things can change quite frequently, and sometimes newer versions can have a regression effect and cause issues with games. Likewise, PS3 emulation is very demanding, and while the majority of the games featured in this video perform well, they can occasionally crash at random times, which is normal and expected given the rapid development environment for RPCS3. Also, some games will have a longer than normal startup process where PPU compilation is happening and will be faster on subsequent launches. Finally, let's talk about the criteria that I've established for this video and how I came about selecting the 50 games being featured in this video. My requirements for this were games that received a disc release of some kind in any territory, so games that were strictly PSN exclusive will not be featured in this video. In addition, I will include games that are exclusive to the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation family of consoles, so games that were released on both PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 will not be featured in this video either. This helps narrow down the list further and allows us to focus on games that are mostly unique and exclusive to the platform, and therefore by using RPCS3 as the only way to allow us to enjoy these games on PC. So without further ado, let's get to this massive list of games. The first game up is 3D Dot Game Heroes, which is still a PlayStation 3 exclusive to this day. This is very much a unique game that uses voxel-based graphics and is inspired by the classic Legend of Zelda and Final Fantasy adventure-style gameplay. This game is a perfect example of why RPCS3 is so important, and without it, this game would still be locked to the PlayStation 3 console. This game does have some issues with random crashes unfortunately, so it isn't a perfect experience, but still worth checking out, and it does run very well using the Silent Mode 10W preset. This game required no tweaks to its settings and can be played with default options. Afrika is another fully exclusive game for the PlayStation 3 that has not seen a release anywhere else. This game is definitely an interesting one, and I'd best describe it as being similar to something like Pokemon Snap, but instead of Pokemon, you are in Afrika taking pictures of various animals while on a safari. It's actually quite a beautiful game graphically and surprisingly pretty demanding, so the footage is set to 15 watts and it does mostly well at this setting, so I suggest just leaving it at that. This game also makes use of the Sixaxis motion to control the in-game camera. For Afrika, the only setting that needs to be changed from the default one is turning on the right color buffer setting under the GPU tab. Otherwise, the game runs really well with RPCS3 on the Ally. Next up, we have another full-blown PlayStation 3 exclusive. Aquapazza is a 2D arcade fighting game that uses the Taito Type X2 arcade system, and outside of the PlayStation 3 release, has not been released anywhere else. Thanks to RPCS3, this one is now playable on PC without any issues and runs incredibly well at 10 watts using default RPCS3 settings. Deception 4 is a PlayStation family exclusive which has seen a release on the PS3, PS4, and the PlayStation Vita. This is part of the long-running Deception series, and the entire concept and gameplay element to Deception is very unique and interesting. The idea of the game is to defeat enemies by luring them into traps that are set into place with a ton of variety. Deception 4 is another game that has no issue running at 10 watts and also uses the default settings for RPCS3. Demon's Souls was probably one of the premier games that most wanted to play using RPCS3, and nowadays this game runs incredibly well. In fact, the gameplay footage is of the game running at 10 watts and has no major issues and is an excellent experience. This is a full-blown PlayStation 3 experience and now does have a remaster available on the PlayStation 5. The only setting I needed to change for this game was to turn on the right color buffer setting under the GPU tab. Dragon's Crown comes to us from Atlus and Vanillaware, and this will not be the last time that we see Vanillaware during this showcase. Dragon's Crown is a gorgeous action RPG mixed in with a beat-em-up and features stunning 2D graphics. Dragon's Crown is probably one of Vanillaware's more popular games and is a PlayStation family exclusive, originally being released for the PS3 and Vita. An enhanced port was released for the PlayStation 4. The best part about Dragon's Crown with RPCS3 is that it is incredibly stable and runs very well using only the 10-watt silent mode preset on the Ally. This is an easy recommendation for anyone looking for some really standout PS3 exclusives that can now be played on PC thanks to RPCS3. Lastly, this game does not need any changes from the default settings. Drakengard 3 is a full-blown PlayStation 3 exclusive that is the sequel to the prior entries back on the PlayStation 2, which I was a big fan of. Drakengard 3 does continue much of the same from those games, and it is a hack-and-slash action game with cool aerial battles where you ride on a dragon. Drakengard 3 will need a little extra power to get running as you see here, and so I recommend setting this to the performance option at 15 watts. Admittedly, majority of the PS3 games in this video will do best with that 15 watt setting, as it is a good balance between battery life and performance. Otherwise, Drakengard 3 runs really well with no major issues and doesn't require any changes to the default RPCS3 settings. So this next one is what my friend over at Team Retro would consider one of my deep hits. This one is a particularly interesting game as it is technically a home console exclusive on the PlayStation 3 as well as being a Japanese exclusive as well, never seeing a release outside of that territory. There is an English fan translation which does translate parts of the in-game text and story, and that is what you're seeing in this gameplay footage. This is an incredibly awesome game and is a spin-off of the Lost Planet series, which if you look closely, you will notice some gameplay similarities. There is a version of X-Troopers on the Nintendo 3DS as well, which is why the PS3 version is a home console exclusive. The game runs great using that 15-watt setting and requires no additional changes to the default RPCS3 settings. By the way, if you are interested, I will have a link in the description to the X-Troopers fan translation project. Folklore is another strict PlayStation 3 exclusive that remains stuck on the platform, never seeing a release anywhere else. This is an absolutely awesome action RPG and one of the standouts in the early days of the PlayStation 3. Because it was an early release, this game does utilize the Sixaxis motion control, and so you will need to have it adjusted for this specific game. The gameplay footage is set to 15 watts, but I do think you might be able to get away with this one at 10 watts, but I felt it was ideal to have it set higher. Finally, Folklore uses default settings, so no changes are needed. Next up is Formula 1 Championship Edition, and this is a full-blown PlayStation 3 exclusive as it's a PlayStation franchise developed by Studio Liverpool, best known for their work on the Wipeout HD series. Unsurprisingly, this game holds up incredibly well graphically and it is still considered a benchmark F1 game, despite it being a fairly early PS3 release. This game does require several custom settings to get it running the way you see here using the 15-watt performance mode. Now under CPU, set the SPU block size to Mega. Under the GPU tab, you'll want to set anti-aliasing to disabled. Select Legacy single-threaded for the shader mode, and turn right color buffers on, as well as turn VSync on. Under the Audio tab, disable audio buffering, which helps fix the no in-game audio issue. Under Advanced, check off Silence All Logs, and finally under the Debug tab, check off Disable Z-Col Occlusion Queries, which help fix weird glitches. So the first Full Auto was an Xbox 360 exclusive, and for whatever reason, the sequel became a PlayStation Family exclusive, seeing a release on the PlayStation Portable and PlayStation 3. This is a fun vehicular combat racing game, and personally, I really enjoy these kind of games. For Full Auto 2, I have the Ally set to 15 watts and didn't need to change any of the default settings in RPCS3. This one runs pretty well at 15 watts, but as you can see, it isn't a full 60 frames per second. However, this does not seem to impact gameplay and it is very playable. Genji Days of the Blade is a PlayStation 3 exclusive that is based on famous battles which took place in ancient Japan. It has you fighting giant enemy crabs, and as you might have guessed, is probably better known for its iconic moment at Sony's E3 press conference.
Famous battles which actually took place in ancient Japan. So here's this giant enemy crab.
However, despite this game not being well received, I actually enjoy it for its fun hack-and-slash gameplay. Genji is running at 15 watts using default settings and does quite well with RPCS3. Of course, we can't have a PlayStation 3 showcase without God of War, and for this one I will be featuring Ascension, which remains a full PlayStation 3 exclusive. By the way, I did cover God of War 3 in my Ally review video, so if you're curious to see how that one performs. For God of War Ascension, you will need to make a few adjustments to the default settings to get it running as you see here. In addition, this is a pretty demanding game and will need a 25-watt turbo mode to get as many frames as you can. This is also a game that has a lot of shader compilation that occurs during gameplay, and so at times you will experience graphical glitches. Now under the CPU tab, you're going to want to set the SPU block size to Mega. For GPU, set the Z-Col accuracy to approximate, and turn on right color buffers. Finally, under the Advanced tab, turn on Accurate RSX Reservation Axis, set the Sleep Timer's accuracy to As Host, and RSX FIFO accuracy to Atomic. The Gran Turismo franchise is another staple of PlayStation, and for this video I chose to go with Gran Turismo 5 as I felt it performed better than 6 with RPCS3. This game does have issues, and even being set to 25-watt turbo mode, you will not get smooth performance. The closest to full speed will be when you have the Ally plugged in to make full use of that turbo mode. In addition, there's tons of shader compilation that takes place, and finally you will need some custom settings to get it running the way you see here. For the CPU, make sure to enable SPU loop detection and set the SPU block size to Mega. Under GPU, set the frame limit to 60, set Z-Col accuracy to approximate, and enable right color buffers, VSync, and multi-threaded RSX. Under Advanced Configuration, enable the accurate RSX reservation access, and set RSX FIFO accuracy to atomic. Finally, under the Debug tab, check off the Disable Z-Col occlusion queries. Next up, we have the PlayStation family exclusive Project Diva F Seconds, which is a pretty popular rhythm game in Japan and comes to us from Sega. This game is available on the PlayStation Vita as well. This is one of the lighter RPCS3 games and runs well at 10 watts and does not need any specific changes to its default settings and is a fun one for fans of rhythm games. Heavenly Sword is a hack-and-slash action game from Ninja Theory, best known for their work on Hellblade. This is a full PlayStation 3 exclusive, and I really enjoy this one quite a bit, and you can see some of the early days of Ninja Theory with their emphasis on a very cinematic experience, and is also quite the technical marvel for the PlayStation 3. This game does not need any changes to the default settings, and works really well at 15 watts with more than usual shader compilation, but overall, it is a very smooth and stable experience. This is definitely one of the higher profile games that remains stuck on the PlayStation 3. Hot Shots Golf Out of Bounds is another entry in the long-running Hot Shots Golf franchise. This specific game is a PlayStation 3 exclusive and was actually released in Japan on the 10th anniversary of the series. I've always loved the Hot Shots Golf franchise, and this is another solid entry in the series. Out of Bounds does pretty well at 15 watts, but will require 2 changes to the default settings to improve the frame rate. Under CPU, you will want to change the SPU block size to Giga, and for the GPU, set the frame limit to 60. Next, we have Infamous 2, which was developed by Sucker Punch Productions, responsible for other popular franchises like Sly Cooper and more recently Ghost of Tsushima. I've always enjoyed the Infamous franchise and really like the superpowers and just wandering around the city. Infamous 2 is a full PlayStation 3 exclusive and has not been released anywhere else. Like many of Sucker Punch's games, Infamous 2 has some pretty impressive visuals for the PlayStation 3 and will need the Ally set to the 25-watt turbo mode to get the best performance. Finally, Infamous 2 does need some custom settings. For the GPU, make sure that multi-threaded RSX and asynchronous texture streaming are both turned on. And lastly, under Advanced, set RSX FIFO accuracy to atomic. Initial D Extreme Stage is a Japanese PlayStation 3 exclusive and an awesome racing game series based on Initial D. This is the sequel to Initial D Special Stage from the PlayStation 2, and personally I have the most experience playing this racing series in arcade, where I fell in love with the franchise. There is a partial English translation patch available for the game, but thankfully since it's racing, you don't need to worry about gameplay too much. There are also YouTube videos that help with walkthroughs. This game runs using the 10-watt silent preset and requires no changes to the default settings and runs very well with RPCS3. J-Star's Victory Versus Plus is the international re-release of this game and is a crossover fighting game featuring the universes of several Shonen Jump properties including Bleach, Naruto, Dragon Ball, and others. This game is a PlayStation family exclusive and has been released on the PS3, PS4, and PlayStation Vita. For this game, I recommend setting the Ally to the 15-watt performance mode to help stabilize the frame rate during more hectic sequences in-game. Otherwise, this game requires no additional changes and uses the default RPCS3 settings. Katamari Forever is a PlayStation 3 exclusive entry in the Katamari series, and if you're a fan of the franchise, expect more of the same here. This entry works great with RPCS3 and uses the Sixaxis motion feature, so you will probably want to have your gyro settings configured for this one. The game doesn't require any special settings and runs great at 10 watts, which is always a good thing. Next up is another full PlayStation 3 exclusive with Killzone 2, and to me, this was a big improvement over the original on the PlayStation 2. The graphics and action are really some of the best on the PlayStation 3, and unsurprisingly pushes the PlayStation 3 pretty hard, and so this is one of the few games that need the 25-watt turbo mode to keep up with it. This is definitely pushing the limits of the Ally as well as the emulation capabilities of RPCS3, but it does run quite well. For this game, I did need to change a few settings. Under CPU, you will want to enable SPU loop detection, and under GPU, you will want to turn on right color buffers. And finally, in advanced, turn both read depth buffers and read color buffers to on. LittleBigPlanet 3, as the title suggests, is the third entry in the main LittleBigPlanet series, which actually got its start on the PlayStation 3. Unlike the first two games, which were developed by Media Molecule, this entry was developed by Sumo Digital. Fans of LittleBigPlanet should mostly know what to expect here, and as always, the visuals are as charming as ever. This one is a PlayStation family exclusive, also seeing a release on the PlayStation 4. For this game, I recommend using the 15-watt performance mode preset, and then making the following changes to the default settings. Under the GPU tab, you will want to set the Z-Col accuracy to approximate, and under advanced, turn on the read color buffers.
Use the action button to trigger blue layer launchers.
Here's another entry in the LittleBigPlanet franchise, but this time around we're presented with a different take on the series with some kart racing. This game is a full-blown PlayStation 3 exclusive, and actually a pretty fun one at that. This game is surprisingly a lot more demanding than it seems, and will require the 25-watt turbo mode to really keep things nice and consistent. There are a few minor graphical glitches, but nothing game-breaking, and you will need to change a few settings to get it running, as you see here. Under CPU, you will want to enable the SPU loop detection and change the SPU block size to mega. For the GPU, set the frame limit to 60, the Z-Col accuracy to relaxed, and turn right color buffers on. And finally, under the Debug tab, turn Force GPU texture scaling to on. Easily one of the most well-known games that are exclusive to the PlayStation 3, Metal Gear Solid 4 was one of the most anticipated releases for the PS3 and a sequel in the long-running Metal Gear franchise. This game has the longest PPU compiling that I have seen on the Ally by far. I mean, it is insanely long, as in you can probably go have a meal and it still won't be done when you've finished. Metal Gear Solid 4 has always been one of the harder to emulate games, and to this day is still not perfectly emulated. Expect the game to crash frequently and exhibit graphical issues. I recommend playing this one using the 25-watt turbo mode for the most performance, and you will need to set the following custom settings. Under GPU, set frame limit to 60, and the Z-Col accuracy to relaxed, with right color buffers turned on. Under advanced, you will want to turn accurate RSX reservation access to on. In the firmware library section, enable the LIB VDEC library. Finally, set the RSX FIFO to atomic and the V-blink rate to 240. The next game on our list is another Japanese exclusive and a pretty popular import title. Mobile Suit Gundam Extreme vs. Full Boost is a PlayStation 3 exclusive with an updated version later releasing for the PlayStation 4, but remains a PlayStation family exclusive. This is a 3D arcade fighting game that incorporates the world of Gundam. It just so happens that this has the second slowest initial PPU compilation time, right after our prior entry of Metal Gear Solid 4. This one just squeaks by on that 15-watt performance mode preset once most of the shader compilation is finished. Other than that, no changes are needed to the default settings, and it does run pretty well despite how terrible I am at the game. Modnation Racers is another kart racing game exclusive for the PlayStation 3, and this one also saw a PlayStation Portable release. This one might look similar to the other kart racing game that was featured here, and that's because both PS3 games were developed by United Front Games. This is another pretty solid and fun racing game that runs pretty well with RPCS3, and unlike LittleBigPlanet, seems to do just fine at 15 watts. This one will need a few minor changes to the default settings. For the GPU, set the Z-Col accuracy to relaxed, and then turn right color buffers on, and that should about do it. Motorstorm is another staple of the PlayStation 3, and it's where the franchise first started. Motorstorm Apocalypse is the third entry for the PlayStation 3 and is a full exclusive and has not been released anywhere else. I've tested all of the Motorstorm games, and they are all pretty demanding games. For Apocalypse, you will need a 25-watt turbo mode to get the same performance you are seeing here, and it mostly holds its consistent frame rate at 30. This one needs a few changes from the default settings. Under GPU, set the SPU block size to mega, the Z-Col accuracy to relax, and finally turn the right color buffers on. The PlayStation 3 version of Odin Sphere is a remake to the PlayStation 2 version. This game is a PlayStation family exclusive and was released for Vita, PS3, and PS4. This game has gorgeous 2D graphics and comes to us from Vanillaware, who is responsible for other great games like Dragon's Crown. This game only needs a 10-watt silent mode preset to run the way you are seeing here and doesn't need any changes from the default settings. It's definitely a nice one to play with RPCS3 and is very stable. Here's a pretty interesting entry. PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale is essentially the PlayStation's version of Smash Bros. This game is naturally exclusive to the PlayStation family, with a release on both PS3 and Vita. All-Stars features characters from various PlayStation properties such as God of War, Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter, as well as other third-party games. The game is pretty bare bones, and it's a shame that it was never revisited because I think they could have built on this formula. This game runs very well at the 15-watt performance mode preset and does not require any changes from the default settings. Okay, so with this next one, I'm kinda cheating, but the Prince of Persia Trilogy HD is technically an exclusive release for the PlayStation 3. The game does have some minor differences to the other versions, including a bit of a facelift, which is pretty divided among fans of Prince of Persia. I don't think it's much of a surprise, but this one has no issues running at a 10-watt silent preset and requires no additional changes to the default settings. Puppeteer is such a cool game that is fully exclusive to the PlayStation 3 and will probably never be seen again. This one comes from Sony's internal Japan studio and is a fantastic side-scrolling platformer that uses animated puppets as the characters. The graphics and presentation here are top-notch, and thankfully this is a game that works very well with RPCS3 using the 15-watt performance mode preset and doesn't require any specific changes to the default settings. Ratchet & Clank Future Tools of Destruction is the first installment of the Ratchet & Clank franchise on the PlayStation 3, and so that's why I decided to go with this entry for the video. There are quite a few Ratchet & Clank games on PlayStation 3, and I'd say that most of them are worth checking out. Since this was an earlier release in the PlayStation 3's life, it does have some motion controls thrown in, but it can be disabled in the options. The game also seems to switch from 30 to 60 frames per second on its own, and I'd say that the gameplay is very smooth using the 15-watt performance mode preset. This game does need a few settings changed from the default. Under the CPU tab, set the SPU block size to mega. Under GPU, set the frame limit to 60. Disable anti-aliasing. Set the Z-code accuracy to approximate. And finally, turn on multi-threaded RSX and asynchronous texture streaming. Resistance Fall of Man was definitely the big launch game for the PlayStation 3, coming to us from Insomniac Games, and is the first entry in the Resistance franchise. This is a pretty fun first-person shooter that holds up pretty well and takes place in an alternate history. This game has a pretty slow PPU compilation time, so you will probably want to grab a snack while it loads the first time. Otherwise, the game works really well at the 15-watt performance mode preset and is quite smooth. You will need to change one setting from the default to fix an issue with the menus and cutscenes. Under the Advanced tab, set the driver wake up delay to 50. The 7th mainline entry in the Ridge Racer franchise, and this one is a full exclusive to the PlayStation 3. If you're a fan of the PSP Ridge Racer entries, then you will definitely enjoy what Ridge Racer 7 has to offer, and I am always a big fan of the Ridge Racer formula, and 7 is no different. This game runs great with the 15-watt performance mode and doesn't require any changes from the default settings, but it does have some issues with cutscenes that are easily skippable and otherwise looks and runs great. Here is a pretty obscure release for the PlayStation 3. Short Piece is a full-blown PlayStation 3 exclusive and was developed by Grasshopper, manufacturer of No More Heroes fame, so you can get an idea of the kind of game to expect here. This is a side-scrolling platform action game and was designed as a hybrid project consisting of 4 parts anime and 1 part video game. Short Piece is definitely well worth exploring, including the animes that tie everything together, and is a fairly short experience. This game runs very well at 15 watts and doesn't require any changes from the default settings. And continuing on with lesser known PlayStation 3 exclusives, Siren Blood Curse is actually the third and final game in the Siren series, continuing from the PlayStation 2. Blood Curse is a full PlayStation 3 exclusive and will most likely never be seen again. If you're not familiar with Siren, this is a survival horror game from Sony's internal Japan studio. This, in my opinion, is the best of the 3 games and features improved gameplay elements and pretty nice graphics. Siren only needs the 10-watt silent mode preset and doesn't require any changes from the default settings. I did observe occasional graphical issues, but nothing that impacts gameplay. Sly Cooper Thieves in Time is the 4th and last Sly Cooper game that has sadly been released. Thieves in Time was released for both the PlayStation 3 and Vita, and was actually not developed by Sucker Punch, but instead it was handed over to Sanzaru Games, who I think did a fantastic job with the franchise and really captured the spirit of the Sly Cooper games. This game requires the 15-watt performance mode preset and performs really well with RPCS3. You will need to make a few changes from the default settings. Under GPU, you will want to set the frame limit to 60 and turn both multi-threaded RSX and asynchronous texture streaming to on. Under Advanced, set the RSX FI/FO accuracy to atomic. Here's another franchise receiving a sequel on the PlayStation 3 that began life on the PS2. SOCOM 4 US Navy SEALs is actually the second SOCOM game on the console, and it is also the last SOCOM game ever released. I was a huge fan of SOCOM on the PS2 and spent considerable amount of time playing the multiplayer portion, and so naturally I was excited to see how SOCOM 4 would turn out, returning into the hands of Zipper Interactive. Just like the games on PS2, I never touched the single player portion and just went straight into multiplayer. Nowadays, we will have to enjoy the single player to remind ourselves of some of the experiences in SOCOM. This one is a heavy hitter for RPCS3, and even with 25 watts is still struggling to hit full speed, but is still playable depending on how tolerant you are. I didn't change any default settings for this one, but I did go into game patches and disabled MLAA. Tales of Exilia is a sequel in the long-running Tales of series, and this entry, along with Tales of Exilia 2, are both full PlayStation 3 exclusives. Like many of the other entries in the franchise, this is an action-based RPG, and both this and the sequel have no issues running on the Ally using the 15-watt preset mode. In addition, both games do not require any changes to the default settings. The footage you are seeing here is of the first game. This next game is such a weird entry, and despite that, still a very interesting game to try out. Tokyo Jungle is a survival action game where you take control of different animals in the middle of a deserted Tokyo that has been transformed into a wasteland. The story mode allows you to figure out what happened to the disappearance of humans in this world. There's a lot of compelling gameplay elements here, and it's definitely one I recommend you check out if you're looking for something different. This game is a full-blown PlayStation 3 exclusive, and I don't think we will ever see this one again. The game runs great using only the 10-watt silent mode preset with no changes to the default settings. Okay, I know I'm cheating with this next one, and probably more so since I don't think this one really has had any assets changed in it. Tomb Raider Trilogy did technically only receive this trilogy release at retail for the PlayStation 3, so it kind of fits the theme, and these are awesome games that I'm always down to include in a video. Now, the games individually did receive ports to just about every platform out there. The footage you are seeing here is of Tomb Raider Legend, and this entire collection runs pretty well at the 15-watt performance mode preset with no changes to the default settings. Twisted Metal probably doesn't need much of an introduction, and this PlayStation 3 exclusive served as another reboot in the long-running vehicular combat series. Developed by Eat, Sleep, Play, with David Jaffe serving as director for the title, there's a lot of familiar gameplay elements here, and many of the classic characters have returned with a story mode to enjoy. This is another heavy-hitting PS3 title, and will require that 25-watt turbo mode to get similar performance that you see here, which is still not full speed, but pretty playable. For this game, we will need to change a few of the default settings. Under the CPU tab, enable the SPU loop detection and set SPU block size to mega. For GPU, set Z-code accuracy to relaxed setting. And finally, turn on both right color buffers and multi-threaded RSX. Easily one of the most recognizable franchises that started on the PlayStation 3, Naughty Dog's Uncharted franchise has been an absolute success for the PlayStation brand. Uncharted 2 is the sequel to the original game, and for me personally completely improves on the original game in every way. Uncharted 2 has been re-released for the PlayStation 4 as part of the Nathan Drake collection, but still remains a PlayStation family exclusive, and so RPCS3 is still the only way to enjoy this game on PC. Uncharted 2, probably to no one's surprise, is a fairly difficult game to run, and even here on the ROG Ally, we are still unable to hit a consistent 30 frames per second. In addition, the game still has graphical and stability issues, and so it's still not a fully playable game on the Ally, but the performance here is still pretty impressive. Uncharted 2 will obviously need the 25-watt turbo mode to get the similar results that you see here, and will require a few changes to the default settings. Under the GPU tab, make sure anisotropic filter is set to auto, and right color buffers, multi-threaded RSX, and asynchronous texture streaming should all be checked on. Under the advanced configuration, turn on accurate RSX reservation access and read depth buffers. And finally, set RSX FIFO accuracy to atomic. Untold Legends Dark Kingdom is the third game in the Untold Legends series, which actually started on the PlayStation Portable. This game is unrelated to the story in the first two games and was actually a launch title for the PlayStation 3 and still remains a full exclusive to the platform. This is a third-person dungeon-crawling RPG similar to Diablo in style, but it is a fairly average game. Untold Legends is a light game to run and only requires the 10-watt silent mode preset with no changes to default settings. Wangan Midnight is another Japanese exclusive racing game and also a full PlayStation 3 exclusive. This game is developed and published by Genji and shares a lot of similarities to another popular racing series produced by them known as Tokyo Extreme Racer. This is actually a pretty awesome racing game that focuses on highway battling, and I think for fans of Tokyo Extreme Racer, you will definitely find a lot to enjoy here despite it being a Japanese release. For this game, I've set the Ally to use the 15-watt performance mode preset, and this game does not need any changes from the default settings. White Knight Chronicles comes to us from the RPG Masters at Level 5 and is co-developed with Sony's internal Japan studio. This is actually Level 5's first release for the PlayStation 3, and it is fully exclusive to the console. There is also a sequel to this game that was released, as well as another game in the series for the PlayStation Portable. I am not the biggest fan of this one, and I think it's actually one of Level 5's weaker games. White Knight Chronicles runs at 15 watts on the Ally and also does not require any changes to the default settings. Wipeout HD is easily one of my favorite racing games for the PlayStation 3. Now, this game remains exclusive to the PlayStation family of consoles, with this game being part of the Omega collection for the PlayStation 4. Easily one of the best aspects of Wipeout HD are the incredible visuals and fast racing as you progress. I found that the 15-watt performance mode preset works mostly well for this game and stays pretty consistent, keeping at that 60 frames per second. The game is quite stable and does work really well overall with RPCS3. The only change needed to be made from the default settings is to enable the right color buffers option under the GPU tab. The Witch and the 100 Knight comes to us from Nippon Ichi Software and are also RPG masters responsible for great games like Disgaea. However, unlike Disgaea, The Witch and the 100 Knight is actually an action RPG. This game did receive a re-release for the PlayStation 4, but still remains a PlayStation console exclusive. In addition, there is a sequel to this game that was released for the PlayStation 4. For this game, I've set the Ally to the 15-watt performance mode preset and found the game works great without many issues. For this one, similar to Wipeout HD, only one change is needed to be made from the default settings under the GPU tab, enabling the right colored buffers setting. And finally, we have made it to the last game in this showcase, and an interesting curiosity in quite a popular franchise. In fact, the Yakuza series is one of my personal favorite series of games, but Dead Souls is an interesting spin-off featuring a lot of the characters that we know and love. Perhaps most surprising is that this game has been left on the PlayStation 3 platform and remains a full exclusive to this day. This game is not considered canon to the main story, and basically you're in the middle of a zombie outbreak. It's a fun departure from the usual in the Yakuza franchise, and for any fans of the series, I'd say it's worth checking out. This game does pretty well at the 15-watt preset, but might have some dips in frame rate when you're in open areas. I did find the game to crash more than usual out of the many games I've tested, so just keep that in mind. This one does require a couple of changes to the default settings. Under CPU, set the SPU block size to Mega, and under Advanced Configuration, enable the accurate GET LLAR option. And that about does it for this one. This was a huge undertaking to gather, test, and tweak all of these games and settings. Please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting down below, as it really does help the channel grow, and your responses will allow me to continue making more of these very in-depth emulation videos. I hope that you enjoyed going through a large portion of the PlayStation 3 exclusive library, and hopefully will find this video useful. I will definitely be back with more Ally emulation coverage in the near future. Until then, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.